When we think about Sweden, we imagine beautiful nature, red cottages, IKEA furniture, ABBA, Vikings,
Dann das! Das gibt's nicht! Ibrahimovic!
and of course, the famous Swedish meatballs. But the funny thing is that the beloved national dish isn't Swedish at all. In fact, it might trace back to a defeated king, an Ottoman sultan, and a 17th century exile. This is the strange but true story of King Charles XII, the man who brought meatballs home to Sweden.
Hej, jag heter Felix. Här är mina köttbullar.
Charles was born in 1682 in Stockholm, heir to the Swedish Empire, a realm that stretched from modern Finland to the Baltic and deep into northern Germany. His father, Charles XI, left him a well-trained army and centralized state, making Sweden a great power of Europe at that time. When his father died in 1697, the 15-year-old Charles was crowned king, pretty young age. He was intelligent, disciplined and fearless, but also restless. He dressed simply, ate sparingly and lived for war. Even Voltaire would later write, "He made war for a long time, not for war itself, but because he was made for it." At the beginning of the 18th century, Europe was a chessboard of rival empires. Sweden stood pretty high among them, controlling vast territories around the Baltic Sea. But this dominance made the young kingdom a target. The Great Northern War would become one of the longest and most defining conflicts in Scandinavian history, pitting Sweden against a coalition of rising powers led by Russia. In 1700, a coalition of three enemies, Russia, Denmark, Norway, and Saxony, Poland, struck at Sweden, hoping to crush the young monarch. Instead, Charles stunned Europe. At Narva, in blinding snow, his outnumbered army of 10,000 smashed 40,000 Russians. It was one of the most spectacular victories of that age. Over the next decade, Charles campaigned relentlessly across Europe, defeating Denmark, marching through Poland, and forcing Augustus the Strong to abdicate. But his obsession with total victory led him even farther from home, deep into Russia, chasing Tsar Peter the Great. In 1709, at the disastrous Battle of Poltava, his exhausted army was annihilated. Sweden's age as a great power ended in a single day. Wounded and pursued, Charles fled south with a few hundred men and crossed into Ottoman territory, seeking refuge. The Sultan, Ahmed III, welcomed him with honor, settling him near the town of Bender, which is today in Moldova. Between 1709 and 1714, Charles lived in what the locals nicknamed the King's Village. He built a small court, corresponded with Istanbul, and tried to persuade the Ottomans to wage war against Russia. His residence became a curious blend of Swedish military discipline and Ottoman luxury, with Swedish officers training, Turkish guards patrolling, and merchants passing through. And rather than describing daily routines, it's more vivid to picture Charles studying Ottoman fortifications, adapting cavalry tactics, and tasting new flavors: kebabs, köfte, pilaf, and coffee, which fascinated the king and influenced the tastes he would later bring home. According to tradition and supported by records from the Swedish National Archives, when Charles finally returned to Sweden in 1715, he brought back not just tales of war, but also tastes and spices from the East. Among them was a recipe for köfte, small balls of minced meat mixed with onions, herbs, and spice. In Sweden, this Ottoman dish was adapted using local ingredients: ground beef or pork instead of lamb, breadcrumbs instead of bulgur, and cream instead of yogurt. Over time, köfte evolved into the famous köttbullar, the Swedish meatball.
Vi kan väl börja med råfrysta köttbullar. I stor förpackning till och med, för frysen hemma. Och man kan ta dem direkt ur den. och bryna dem. Alldeles stenhårda. Man börjar med het stekpanna och sen sänker man värmen. Skakar lite då och då. Och på 7-8 minuter så är köttbullar av den här storleken färdiga.
It's likely that the idea of shaping minced meat into balls already existed in parts of Europe. But Charles' long exile in the Ottoman Empire spread new flavors and cooking methods through returning soldiers and merchants. The king's fondness for simple but hearty meals helped popularize the dish at Swedish royal banquets after his return. During the same time, Sweden was a kingdom drained by war. Its economy was in ruins and its people were weary of fighting. Yet the king, who had once conquered half of northern Europe, refused to rest. His ambition still burned to reclaim the lost glory of the Swedish Empire. Between 1716 and 1718, Charles launched 2 campaigns against Norway, hoping to strike at Denmark-Norway and force them to the peace table. The first invasion faltered due to supply shortages, but Charles tried again the following year. In the winter of 1718, he besieged Fredriksten fortress near the town of Halden. It was there that the end came. While inspecting the trenches, Charles was struck in the head by a single bullet and died instantly, aged only 36. His sudden death shocked Europe. Official reports blamed enemy fire, but others suspected foul play. Some witnesses claimed that the shot came from behind, suggesting that he may have been assassinated by his own men, who were tired of the endless campaigns and war. The truth remains a mystery. But his death marked the final collapse of Sweden's age as a great power. The once invincible warrior fell in the snow, ending an era of ambition, war and empire, and leaving behind a history that still stirs debate up to this day. But his story and influence lived on, even in the unlikely form of a simple dish in the shape of a ball.
Med Mamma Scan, Sveriges mest älskade köttbullar, sparar du massor av tid i köket. Just nu kan du dessutom samla mammor och spara till en veckotidningsprenumeration. Hämta samlarhäfte i din butik.
In the centuries that follow, köttbullar became a staple of Swedish cuisine. Cookbooks from the 18th and 19th centuries reference recipes that trace their roots to the Ottoman-inspired dish Charles brought home. By the 20th century, meatballs had become a national symbol, served with lingonsylt and creamy gravy, representing comfort and home rather than conquest. In 2018, the Swedish government's official Twitter account even posted, "Swedish meatballs are actually based on a recipe King Charles XII brought home from Turkey." It caused a worldwide stir, but historians agreed. While meatballs in various forms existed across Europe before, Charles' exile undeniably helped popularize the Eastern-style dish of seasoned meat, which we now know as köttbullar. So, next time you eat Swedish meatballs at IKEA while you buy your furniture, remember, behind that humble dish stands a king who fought tsars, dined with sultans, and reigned the Swedish Empire. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something new. If you want to support the channel, please leave a subscription if you haven't already. What other historical figure or topic should I do next? And as always, this is HistoryCrafts, where history crafts itself.